moves at that point. All right, so in today's webinar, Workforce Management Trends for Hourly Workers, I'm happy to be joined by a few great guests, a couple of our own. So one of them, first, is Sarah Kimmel. Sarah oversees the research division here at Workforce.com, and she develops and delivers research and analysis that is relevant and important to human capital leaders across a broad range of human resource disciplines. Another one of our own here is Paul Smith. Paul leads the customer success team here at Workforce.com. And their North American software clients. So welcome to you as well, Paul. And then joining us is Stacy Huffstetler. Stacy is the Managing Director of North America at WidgetBrain, and she is responsible for success and growth of the North American business over there at WidgetBrain. So I am very happy to be joined by all three of today's presenters, but first things first, I'm going to pass things over to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Alec, and welcome to everyone joining us today. So first, a really quick overview of what we're going to cover today. I'm going to share some research that we've just completed for Workforce, and then Paul and Stacy are going to illustrate the trends that we're seeing in workforce management through sharing some case studies and some insights into emerging technologies. And also, I'll circle back to these three trends from the data as I go. But overall, what we see from the survey data is that organizations want their workforce management tools to be more mobile. They want to increase their labor analytics capabilities, and they'd like to increase the automation that they're using for workforce management. So I'm going to be sharing some data with you today from a study that we've just completed on workforce management trends. And this is the first fresh data that we've had on this topic in 3 years. So it was interesting to see what had been changing out in the landscape of workforce management since the last time we'd done this study. Before I dive into sharing the data, let me tell you just a little bit about the research that I'll be sharing with you today. So the survey was delivered online to workforce subscribers at manager level and above in September and October of last year. The total survey had more than 400 respondents. But since we had such a solid group of organizations with primarily hourly workforces participate, we decided to take a deep dive into the trends for hourly workforces. So all of the data that I'll share with you today is for the 207 organizations with primarily hourly workers that participated in the study. So we had a good spread of organization sizes participating. 52% were from organizations with less than 1,000 employees, 30% from organizations with 1 to 10,000 employees, and 18% from organizations with more than 10,000 employees. So larger organizations are a little overrepresented in our sample, but not by too much. The participants in the study were primarily from North America, but 21% of them were from multinational or global organizations. So the first thing that I want to share with you today is the pain points. When workforce management professionals are looking at their current systems, what do they see as the shortcomings? And the answers here are pretty illuminating. They say that their workforce management systems don't have great integration with other systems. This can have profound consequences for the amount of manager time these tasks are eating up. It can also increase errors that create dissatisfaction in the workforce, especially if those errors involve people's paychecks or time off. And finally, it can put serious limitations on the ability to use analytics to diagnose productivity issues and scheduling issues, among other things. And I'll come back to analytics later in more depth. The second shortcoming respondents report highlights similar issues. 41% say that there's still too much manual work. Part of this is explained by data I'll share later that shows that 25% of organizations are still mostly relying on a paper-based process. So that's 1 in 4 organizations that lack any kind of digital automation or interface for workforce management. But one of the things we'll see later is that even when they do have a workforce management system in place or even a mobile solution, it may lack the functionality that they wish they had. More than 1 in 3 organizations say that they have a lack of or a limited integration with mobile devices in their workforce management system. 55% of organizations say that they are currently using mobile devices for some part of workforce management. And we'll take a deeper dive into that just a little bit later. But with 36% saying the lack of mobile integration is a shortcoming on top of the 55% who are already using it, what's obvious is that mobile capabilities for workforce management is something that a significantly large majority of organizations want. And 60% say it's a top priority for them when they're evaluating a new solution. And a little more than 1 in 4 organizations say that their current workforce management system has limited access for certain users or locations. So not every business has people working in a fixed office location. Workforce management and tracking can get a little bit tricky for organizations that send employees out on location, have frequent travel arrangements, or even for organizations that have a lot of virtual employees. And 1 in 4 organizations also say their current workforce management system is hard for employees to learn or use. And I'm sure that all of you who have used technology will be shocked to learn that people might find it confusing or frustrating. But in a world of Amazon and Facebook, people's expectations about user experience have gotten a lot tougher. The next thing I want to share are the top challenges for different parts of workforce management. So first, time and attendance. There are really just 2 significant challenges that organizations report for managing time and attendance. Nearly half of them, 48%, say a challenge in managing time and attendance is manual errors. Second, 40% say that they don't currently have seamless integration of core HR and payroll. So this echoes what we just saw with the pain points for current systems. The other thing that I'd like to point out here is that for the most part, organizations don't seem to find it really challenging to demonstrate compliance with wage and hour laws. That could become more of a challenge as a lot of Fair Workweek laws go into effect in different regions this year. Next, for employee scheduling, we start to see a much broader range of significant issues. The top challenge for managing employee schedules, cited by 42% of organizations, is maximizing overall labor effectiveness and productivity. And this tells us something very important, which is that organizations are now thinking of scheduling strategically, not just in a transactional kind of way. It's much more strategic to be asking yourself how you can use scheduling to maximize your productivity, to get the right people together on shifts to maximize effectiveness. And Stacy has a great example of how this can be done in her case study, which she'll share with you today. It's always a challenge to fill shifts when unplanned absences occur, but 1 in 3 organizations also say that it's a challenge to accurately anticipate scheduling needs. And that links to analytics again, which I'll cover in depth in a few minutes. And finally, about 1 in 4 organizations say it's a challenge to prevent employee fatigue and manage budgets connected to scheduling. And one of the interesting things about scheduling is that right now, it's the workforce management function that's most likely to be manual rather than technology enabled. 37% of survey respondents said that they currently manage their scheduling manually. So this is probably also an area where you could expect to make a significant impact with a switch to a technology-enabled solution. Lastly, here are the top challenges for absence and leave management. And what you'll notice right off is that managing leave has more challenges than other areas. Half of all organizations say that it's a challenge to fill a role during an employee's absence. Nearly half say keeping all parties informed and applying the rules consistently is a challenge. 42% find it challenging to prevent leave abuse, and 38% are challenged managing leave cases. And finally, a little more than 1 in 3 say it's a challenge to plan an employee's return to work. So in the current tight labor market with very low unemployment rates, it doesn't seem that surprising that leaves of absence are also more challenging all around. And I expect that many of you have also felt these challenges in recruiting and retention as well. And in fact, when we asked organizations about what their high priority workforce management issues were in the next 12 to 18 months, there were 2 standout answers. employee engagement, and employee retention. More than 2/3 of organizations said employee engagement was a high priority workforce management issue for them in the near term, and 60% said retention was a high priority issue. And what you'll see in this chart is that when organizations think about the impacts of non-compliance with labor regulations, their top concerns are employee morale, damaged reputation, and attrition. More than 1/3 are worried about litigation and fines, but in a tight labor market, a world where your unhappy employees can and will take you to task publicly on social media and job sites can be a bigger concern. Certainly, we've seen a broad shift in HR over the past several years towards efforts to improve organization status as a preferred employer or being a great place to work. And we also see interesting developments that show workforce management is becoming a more strategic and less transactional practice overall. So organizations are really starting to look at the employee experience as something that they want to manage and improve, as this can help quite a bit on the recruiting and retention side of things. And this can lead to looking for answers in technology to make it possible to be more strategic about scheduling and to collect and leverage analytics to solve issues as they arise. So I'm going to shift now from challenges and talk about the 3 trends that we discovered about workforce management for organizations with hourly workforces. The first big trend we see in workforce management is a decided shift toward adoption of mobile capability. 55% of organizations with hourly workforces have some mobile capability for workforce management. In addition, 60% of organizations who already have a workforce management system say mobile capability would be a priority for them in a new system. And it's even slightly higher for those who don't currently have a system, 61% of whom say that they would prioritize mobile capability in a workforce management solution. Also, remember that lack of or limited integration with mobile is a top 3 shortcoming of current workforce management platforms for more than 1/3 of organizations. So this is where things get interesting. What you see in the chart on the left is that the functions that organizations say they currently have through mobile capabilities, and what's immediately clear is that these functions are not very comprehensive. When you remove the 45% of organizations who say they don't have mobile capabilities at all, and look only at those who do, what you can see is that primarily mobile is only allowing those who use it to check their time off balances and submit time off requests. And even those 2 functionalities are not necessarily a given. Only 56% of those who do have mobile capability can access their schedules through their mobile device. 51% can enter time in and out for breaks, and 36% can attribute time to specific activities. Only 9% can swap shifts through their mobile device. So while it's very clear that mobile capability is highly desired and prioritized, it's equally clear that mobile functionality is also limited, even for organizations that already have it. So even those that are mobile capable right now are not leveraging it very hard at present. The next big trend that we see is towards increasing use of analytics. 65% of the survey respondents say labor analytics is a priority when evaluating a new workforce management software. At Workforce, we've seen this trend on several of the past HR State of the Industry surveys. Workforce analytics is a priority. Organizations want more capability in this area. 68% of organizations in this study say that they are using automation to capture labor analytics. A little bit less, 58%, say they're using labor analytics to diagnose issues or problems that they have. And less again, 45%, say that they're using labor analytics to drive value. You'll also notice that there's a big drop-off in those who strongly agree. So organizations are doing this, but they're not very emphatic or confident about their capabilities here. Overall, there's a strong trend that we can see here towards using labor analytics, but the practice doesn't seem completely mature. Also remember that the top shortcoming of current workforce management systems is a lack of integration with other systems. So this is a big obstacle for effective analytics practice. And the third and final trend is around increasing automation in the employee experience of workforce management. So the good news is about 75% of organizations say that they have at least some automation in their workforce management platforms. And the bad news is that, as we saw with mobile functionality, the automation they have is limited. Only 28% of organizations say that the way their employees interact with their existing platform is mostly or fully automated. Of the different workforce management functions, time and attendance is the least likely to be manual, with 13% of organizations managing time and attendance manually, and staff scheduling is the most likely to be manual, with a whopping 37% of organizations saying that their scheduling is manual. 20% of organizations are also managing leaves of absence manually. So what's clear when you go digging, though, is that the functions that are more likely to be manual are also the functions that are likely to have the more serious challenges that we looked at earlier. So the issue here with automation is primarily about the employee experience. It hasn't escaped anyone's notice that the prevalence of consumer technology experience has been impacting the expectations of employees for the technology they interact with in the workplace. Employees are expecting a customer-grade experience. And as noted earlier, when we asked employers what impacts they were worried about when it came to noncompliance, their concerns were much more likely to be about a negative impact on employee morale or damage to their brand reputation, rather than more transactional impacts like legal action or fines. Now, to be clear, organizations are concerned about those transactional impacts, but in this tight labor market, they are more concerned about how those kinds of mistakes might impact on their ability to recruit and retain the employees that they need. So I think that we're likely to see more of a shift toward increasing automation as employers catch up to the technology experience that employees have come to expect in the consumer market. And now I'm going to pass things over to Paul, who's going to talk about the current state of Gen 4 technology for workforce management.
Great, thank you, Sarah. And thank you everyone for dialing in today and listening to us talk about workforce management. We'd love to talk about it. We're excited about it, and hopefully you will find this informative and look forward to any questions at the end here. Okay, so to start us off, first, to understand the trends, I think it's helpful to go back and first look at the overview of the technology life cycle. So we're going to do that. And then we're going to get into current labor conditions and how they impact those trends. And then we will set up to explore a case study about a company that has multiple generations of technology and how they dealt with it. And then lastly, we're going to finish up with some trends that we're seeing today in the workforce management. Okay, so with this, to understand the trends, let's summarize some of Sarah's key findings. Okay, I think when we're looking at this, we want to look and say, what are the key issues? What are the goals of companies? What are the current state? And how do employees impact the trends? So as you can see here, we're looking at some of the key items from Sarah's report. 48% of companies are still having manual errors. And you think about that, you think about why is that happening? Again, manuals, we usually associate that with paperwork and Excel users, which is pretty hard to believe when you consider how far technology has come, and you'll see that later today. But it's really not that far off what we see on a day-to-day basis. Many of our customers that we talk to are actually still in the paper world, and they're looking to make the leap from where they're at today to the newest generation, which is great to see. We look at company goals. 42% want to minimize layer productivity, which is a great lead into what Widget Brain is going to be covering later today. Desire to fill shifts. Again, there's technology out there today that will solve this, which we'll see a little bit later. And then we look at where things stay in the current state. So data not being used, again, employees do not have mobility, manual analytics. These are all things that are solved with fourth generation technology. And then all the way down to employees. Again, employees, as Sarah mentioned, are a big driver out there today where their morale is at in a tight labor market. So not having the ability to shift and not entering shift preferences, those again are things that are solved with technology of the fourth generation. Okay, so how do we understand this? So first let's level set with the life cycle wave. As you can see here, there's 5 stages, and most people are familiar with this, but for those who aren't, you have your innovators, early adopters, early majority, late majority, and then laggers. So those are the phases through any life cycle, but specifically the technology life cycle here. And then inside that, there's something we refer to as the Goldilocks zone. This is actually something that comes from the space arena, but we've stole it and brought it over here. And so what does that mean? Well, that means that you're looking for a technology that is not too cold, as in the Goldilocks fable. So basically the bugs have all been worked out of technology. Not too hot. It's going to be very cost prohibitive, and it's just right. It's going to offer you the features to solve problems that's going to make a significant impact on your company today. So let's think about that. Let's use an example. So one example in the technology space is cell phones. When you think about it, cell phones were made by Alexander Graham Bell back in 1880s, and then they went into landlines, which lasted about 100 years. And then you had your first generation of cell phones that came out is the brick phones in the 80s. Again, the feature there was mobility, but it was also very expensive, so it really didn't hit that Goldilocks zone. So really you only had your inventors and early adopters using that technology. But then the next generation came out in the 90s, and those phones were compact. They were the flip phones. Motorola put out a model of those. And you had people that eagerly got into this. The consumer market started picking it up in the 90s, and it really took off. So you can see that's where that was in the zone there. And so people started getting cell phones, and so you basically got into those early adapters in that phase. And then on the next generation of cell phones, you had additional features that started being added to it. So specifically cameras. So people, they were carrying a camera and a phone around, 2 devices. They were able to put it into one. The advent of selfies came in, which was a feature obviously we all needed, and so on. So those features came out with Gen 3. And then in Gen 4, you got the smartphones, and those came out in 2007. And this is really what we call a wow moment, where the functionality of a cell phone is just amazing when you think about it today. You can actually have apps of all different functionality on your phone. You can do alerts, notification, facial recognition, and it's quite remarkable what a phone can do. That being said, you still have people reluctant, myself included, to change from one generation to the next, which is not uncommon. I remember my BlackBerry, I loved it. I was concerned about going to the touch screen, and that's not an uncommon feature or a functionality when you're moving from one generation to the next. So as you can summarize here, multiple generations, each has a different wave, and then within each wave you have different stages, the 5 stages going throughout. Again, increasing functionality as you go through the different waves, and ultimately you're looking to solve problems. And then as you get further down into the generations, there's usually a wow factor where the functionality just really becomes outstanding. When you think about cell phones today, you can open up an app and see where somebody is, when they're there, why they're there, which being the father of teenagers, I love as a function. Again, functionality is just amazing. Okay, so now we're going to pull this into technology and where we stand. And so we're going to look at a workforce solution, and we're going to focus on a specific segment of it on time clocks and time and attendance within this space. So if you look at a time clock, when you really think about it, there's the generation 0 in this case, which is people using paper, which as Sarah explained, there's quite a few people out there today still using that. But time clocks have been around since the early 1900s. But then time clocks went from a very manual machine to basically gathering data. So it's a very static type of equipment that's gathering data and then pushing it into an HRIS system to allow for payroll and any data analytics that can be pulled around that. The pulling of that information usually required at first, it was a chip that you'd put inside. You'd have to download it and then put it on a system. If anybody went through those time clocks or used these time clocks, and these ones actually are still sold out there today, very manual. And then they put a phone line into it and started pulling the data over. So then the next generation was software-based. And this really started pulling information into a software and you could start manipulating it. And so this is when you really, in the HR space, had client servers. This was around the 1970s. So basically people were able to take information and now have it in the system. You could put together Excel spreadsheets and you could start doing things with it. It was not easily managed, so usually you had to have an in-house IT person who would work with the systems, who could give you the reporting and the information the way you wanted it, when you wanted it, not very timely, not very user-friendly. Again, an earlier generation. From there, it evolves through and to the next stage, which was cloud-based. Cloud-based really came out around 2000 time frame, give or take, and basically there, you started having people pushing information up into the cloud. And so once that happened, you really started having the ability to manipulate the data and make it actionable. So IoT started to come into play. And so you really started to do different things with it. APIs started coming in, the ability to pull information and push information without having to do custom development time to link into different systems. That came in around the 2010 time frame, give or take. And really information really started to become powerful. And then into the fourth generation, which is the generation we're in today, where you have data warehouses, you have interconnected data across different devices. It's very user-friendly, so the UX, UI experience is what you would expect out of like a cell phone, so now you have that in business. And so you are able to see how it's now changed as time goes. And so what I would do is look at yourselves and look at your own organization and look at your own systems and try to figure out, okay, where are you in that life cycle? Which wave are you in? And then where are you within that wave? And then you have to decide, okay, is it a time to start thinking about, do we change and how do you change? Is it cost effective to change, and what is the right solution? And then another dynamic you should consider and look at is as you have an entire system within a company of solutions, there's not only HRIS, but there's the financial, there's the CRM, there's the operation production, there may be an inventory solution, and all those interplaying together. And again, an organization may be advanced in some areas. Usually the financial systems were the first to change. HRIS were secondary. Operations sometimes came down the path. And so you can kind of look at it as a full-on spectrum to decide where your company's at and ultimately where they're going. So what is in that current state offering of fourth generation? There's things such as demand-based scheduling, which Sarah was mentioning earlier. So that is in fourth generation of solutions that are out there. There's compliance analytics. So most fourth generation solutions have a very strong compliance engine. And why is that? We'll talk about that in a little bit. Cognitive shift filling. So you basically use data analytics to set up schedules. There's mobility for both the managers and employees. And this mobility is going to be as simple as using a cell phone, a smartphone. So nowadays mobility, if you have a solution in-house that doesn't have a lot of functionality, that just tells you you're on a previous generation, third or second generation at best. Smart alerts are common mobility APIs. Okay? So let's talk about compliance. One thing about compliance, it's one of those things that until it bites you, you think everything's great, but once it bites you, it can be painful. And here's an example of just one company that I'm aware of that had a real sting when it came to compliance. As Fair Work Week ordinances are being spread across the country, they weren't keeping up with one city, New York specifically, and they really got stung. A national provider that basically was not keeping up with the rules. And why is that the case? Well, they're complex. And when you think about it, you have local ordinances. So the major hubs throughout the United States, New York, San Francisco, Seattle, soon to be Chicago, all have Fair Work Week ordinances that are coming into play. And then for each area, you can have multiple criteria, whether somebody's within the city or outside the city limits, maybe in a metro area. And then in addition to that, you layer on top CBAs. So you can see how complex this problem is. Well, that's exactly what technology is for, is to solve complex problems. And if it's not solved, you can see the potential of a lawsuit, stock pricing, and brands getting damaged by this. So what can technology do? It can basically set up an engine of rules to allow you to manage the different complexity across all these different levels. And so that fourth generation of technology out there today provides that for you. And so this is a great way to leverage technology to solve something that is a very complex problem. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about a case study. So this company that we're going to be looking at had multiple generations of a technology solution within their organization. Why is that? They were actually a roll-up of multiple companies that were trying to then figure out, okay, how do we leverage our technology to maximize what we're doing? 20,000 employees across the U.S., Canada, and Europe. They had both collective bargaining agreements and non-union workers within their organization. Their owners were technology-based, and they were trying to figure out, okay, how do we get to the latest and the greatest generation? So again, antiquated systems. They were using paper for about 25% of their employees on the HRIS side. So they're having employees fill out applications, put it on paper, then somebody was keying it into their systems, and then taking it from there. The systems didn't talk to each other because of multiple companies and multiple different HRIS platforms. So they're trying to figure out, how do we do this? How do we manage across these systems? Some were first, then second generation technology, and it was just a mess. Extensive use of Excel sheets to manage all this information. So they literally had to hire a team on the support side who were just managing Excel spreadsheets to manage all the data, to get the reports to the leadership team. And of course, none of those reports were timely, just given the volume of work they had to put through, 20,000 employees. And then the biggest issue at the end for them was compliance. They knew in the different cities, and even with some of the CBAs, that at best they were barely staying compliant, and at worst they were out of compliance and had the potential for lawsuits. And so this was a big issue for them. And so that was ultimately the trigger that they realized, look, we need to make a change here. As well as then they looked at it once they started peeling back the onion and said, okay, what are our true costs of this system, the turnover, the open shifts, the overtime at 7 times the average for the industry. And they said, look, we've got to be able to find a technology solution that is going to work for us. And so they did that. They went out and they looked at HRIS, time, attendance, and scheduling solutions out there. They brought them in, had conversations with them. They vetted the different solutions that they had come in. They put together their specifications, put it out, and the ultimate goal was to eliminate paperwork in the manual processes, which is part, if any of you have gone through these types of transition, is something that you have to weigh in, because ultimately sometimes things are written down and it's not exactly the way the processes are supposed to work. And so ultimately they were working towards 100% compliance with the out on this solution decision. So once they made a decision, they got an ROI on their investment within 12 months. They were able to decrease labor, increase revenues, and then they became compliant, which was a win all the way across the table. So what is it that they are looking for, any company is looking for, in a 4th generation system? 4th generation systems should be easily configurable. This means that there is not a lot of development time that is required. The older systems, people would always say, yes, we can do that, but the underlying message was there's development time that was required, which is very expensive. The newer systems, the platforms they're built on today, do not require a lot of that. It's basically flicking switches on and off. And so there's quite a few switches, so in the implementation of any system, you have to allow for that, but once you work through that, it can go relatively quickly. Now, flexible workflows, the ability to say every company is a little bit different, and the workflows for any HRIS system should allow for those, and that is in the new generation there. Easy use of a super user. So you have administrators that are going to have to manage the program once it's been implemented. In the past, again, you had IT programmers that whose primary function was to do this. With these new systems today, that's gone. A super user is able to use a system like this similar to using Excel spreadsheets. And so there is a small bit of learning to be had there, but truly not on the level of an IT programmer. Data analytics and warehousing of information, very much part of Gen 4 solution. That information is not only coming from the HRIS space, but also from the finance field, from any operation, inventory systems, from maybe even a CRM solution. So all that information is being put into a warehouse, and leadership can pull down information the way they want to see it, when they want to see it, in real time in some cases. To be able to provide great information and reporting and have a competitive advantage in making decisions. And then reporting, again, the primary thing there is templates or custom reporting, which requires dev time. With these data warehouses, again, configuring reports and getting them the way you want to see them is very simple. Okay. Lastly, in conclusion, if things aren't getting better, you're getting left behind. So it's always about improving the solution and system. Assessing where you're at today, figuring out where you're at. Are you in Gen 0? Are you in Gen 4? And where are you within that life cycle of your generation of solution? And if you're not in the Goldilocks zone, why? Why you're not there? What is the cost to change? And what are the benefits? What are the upsides of change? And then lastly, you can think about it again. You can push a button nowadays on a phone, and you can find out where somebody is and when they're there. You can do the same thing with scheduling, flipping switches for flipping shifts, and then also additionally for scheduling. So all those functionalities are out there. You just need to go out and find them and explore them. With that, you'll get a little bit of a deep dive here from Stacy from WidgetBrain about how her specific technology works, and specifically in the scheduling space. So, Stacy, take it away.
Thanks so much, Paul. As mentioned, so today I'm from WidgetBrain, and we're going to focus on the demand-based schedule and cognitive rosters side of things, really looking at how those types of technologies can help businesses maximize labor effectiveness and productivity. So at WidgetBrain, we are really passionate about how technology, in particular how AI, can help companies achieve their goals. And some of the major goals that we really see organizations looking to achieve these days around improving scheduling. So one of the statistics cited was that 37% of organizations are currently scheduling manually. So if you look at transitioning towards an automated or AI-driven scheduling process, what are some of the key benefits that you can look to achieve? So this is really around improving business performance, which is going back to those ideas of maximizing labor effectiveness, maximizing productivity by really getting the right match of supply and demand. So if you know how many customers are coming to your store, to your business, you can know how many employees you need to serve them and when. And this really drives that business performance. It also really drives employee happiness as well. So a big part of employee happiness is that you have the right number of people there to do the job. Understaffing and overstaffing, they hurt your labor costs side of things. They also hurt employee happiness because people's job satisfaction is very much tied to kind of the quality of the shift, employee fatigue. And then also leveraging technology like AI, you can really take into account a broader range of factors, employee preferences, labor laws, et cetera, to make sure that you're creating schedules that work with and for your employees so that they can do a better job of working in your organization day in and day out. And finally, it's been touched on a number of times. The Chipotle case is a great example. We see more and more of this, just really the importance of ensuring compliance with labor laws and rules. In particular, as was pointed out, national organizations, national brands that operate in so many different local jurisdictions. How do you keep track of all of the different labor laws, and how do you help empower your local store managers to make sure that they're making the right decisions and that they're complying? 99% of the time, the compliance issues are not intentional neglect. They're more oversight, lack of understanding, et cetera. So how can you kind of ensure that consistency across a broad network, especially as a national brand, or even a relatively small operator, operating in a jurisdiction like New York City? How can you really ensure compliance? Technology can help make sure that those rules are implemented and looked after. So what we really see when you think about these three different axes is traditionally people thought of them as competing. So traditionally labor budgets were set as a top-down, finance-driven decision saying, okay, you have a labor budget of X, or you need to cut costs by 5%. And that was really, again, kind of a top-down decision that was very much focused on labor as a cost. But more and more organizations are starting to think about labor as also an asset. So these employees that, yes, they represent a cost, they also are what is going to drive the performance within your stores, going to drive revenue for your business. You're not going to sell anything at all if you don't have any employees, right? So balancing these things, and then also, those employees are so important. So how can you boost their happiness? How can you, kind of ensure that they are getting the schedules that work for them so that you can really reduce turnover, and also provide better customer service and better customer experience in your stores. So we see technology as very much a way to balance these three competing priorities. So rather than trying to pull the needle all the way towards cost, pushing it all the way towards happiness or performance, through technology, through AI, you can really balance all of these different competing factors and come up with a schedule that reflects how your business wants to weigh these different options. All right, so when you really start to think about what does this look like? So if we're creating demand-based schedules, what are the steps in that process? It's actually pretty straightforward. So this is, again, we're thinking about scheduling. So we're thinking about 28 days out from when you're actually going to execute the schedule. The first step is really demand forecasting. So this is all about getting an understanding of, for your store, for each of your locations, for each areas of your business, what are the key demand drivers and what is the forecast for those in the future period. So we typically take per location, per demand drivers, that can be sales or transactions or foot traffic, items sold, revenue, et cetera. For each of those demand drivers, we're going to figure out what is the best fit model to forecast that demand, and then also when can you expect customer volumes to come in to the store, at what points in time throughout the day. So we're typically looking at the 15-minute or the bucket or the hourly bucket level. Why is that important? Very important, because the question isn't just how many hours do you need in a week or how many hours do you need in a day. Very important to understand kind of within a day, okay, if your minimum staffing is 2 people in a location, when do you bring on the 3rd person? When do you bring on the 4th person? And so that intraday scheduling, intraday demand forecasting is a really pivotal part of that. Building on that, so once you have an idea of when that customer demand is going to be coming to your locations, then you need a labor standard in order to convert that into a required headcount curve. So if you're going to do $100 in sales, maybe that means you need 2 people, right? $300 of sales, 3 people, to give a very simple example. So that allows you to understand, okay, how many shifts do I actually need to create to cover this required headcount, this required demand that I have. When you start thinking about shift creation, this is really where you start looking at, well, what's my desired service level? So I can cover every single peak of demand throughout the day, provide excellent service that's going to be a slightly higher labor cost than a solution where you maybe leave some time periods undercovered and allow potentially customers to wait a little bit longer, queues to build up a little bit. That's kind of a flexible area where it's really a business decision what that desired service level is and how you want to weigh the cost of staffing versus the benefit of providing customer service. And this is also where you start to get into compliance, right? So those shift and break rules. Given the demand throughout the day, what are the best start times to be compliant with the labor laws? What are the right breaks to fit in to those shifts to be compliant? And how can you really put the breaks in the right position throughout the day in order to both, give your employees the breaks when they need them, but then also cover the demand in the best way possible. And so demand forecasting and shift creation, these are slightly longer term steps, and they're really important, though, also in terms of getting to an eventually compliant schedule. So Fair Workweek legislation has been mentioned a couple of times. A big part of that is the idea that once a schedule is published, you pay a premium for changing it. And by having a better idea of your demand that's coming, you can have a better idea of what those shift schedules should be, so you have less need to change them within a shift within the day. So you have less need to send someone home early or ask someone to stay longer, things which do incur a premium. Then finally, the last step, which really kind of builds on our themes of employee happiness and compliance, is the idea of shift filling. So you need to assign those shifts to people, and you do that, you want to take into account their roles and their skills, their preferences, their unavailabilities, the local labor laws that tell you, what's the minimum rest time between shifts, things like cloakings, are those allowed or not allowed? Is there a premium for those? So those are all the kind of factors that you can take into account. And the real key here is that this is all it's an automated process. So this is kind of how do you move away from a manual process and what are the steps to get there. So we look at really what are some of the typical outcomes of an approach like this. This is kind of starting to get into that case studies. These are some examples of more efficient schedules that can be created. And so in the top chart here, we actually show the current state, and then the bottom chart we show a proposed schedule. And so some immediate things might jump out at you. In the current state, and I think a lot of organizations schedule this way based on what we see, they're bringing in 2 people first thing in the morning and then another 6 people at noon, and that's their entire schedule for the day. And they probably repeat that every single Sunday. And what we see is that means you just end up having lots of inefficiencies baked in to the schedule. And you can kind of see some of those inefficiencies in some of the places where the actual required demand is the dark blue bars. The supply, the number of employees, is the lighter bar going above it. And you can see places where those just don't line up. So in particular, you have way too many people around noon, and then you are significantly undercovered all afternoon. So in the bottom section, this is an example of how using demand forecasting, we forecast this day, we create a schedule for this day, and then we compare it to what actually happened on that day. So you can see the comparison, and what you see is that you get some staggered shift start times, you get staggered break times throughout the day, and you get a schedule that much better fits the demand pattern. So going back to this idea of you bring in 2 people at the start of the day, when do you bring in the 3rd person, the 4th person, the 5th person? You don't need to kind of lump them all together. You can make much more intelligent decisions. And almost most importantly, you can really empower local store managers to make these decisions with technology and really give them the tools to do a better job of that. Now, kind of thinking about, building on this case study. So one of the projects that we've worked on with Workforce was really around pizza delivery, right? And the key challenge here was how can we, again, maximize labor effectiveness and productivity. They had some very specific constraints that made it an interesting puzzle. So some things like they could only have 2 drivers start at the same time because they didn't want to have traffic jams. So they kind of had some interesting nuances, and I think that's part of what makes the need for technology really kind of makes you have a need for technologies when you have kind of these specific constraints. It's not just a generic problem. And they also really, clopening's minimum rest time was a really big constraint for them. And so kind of going through this whole process with them, we were able to help them actually reduce labor costs by 6% in the end. So that's kind of the end net result of taking into account all of these constraints, the demand forecasting, the shift creation, the shift billing. In net result, we were able to show a 6% labor cost reduction, $30 more sales per man hour, and then finally, and going back to the Chipotle example, most importantly, kind of 100% labor law compliance. So I think that's the summary, that's the approach that we've taken, and I think really what we're trying to show here is that these trends, they really point towards a lot of folks aren't using automated scheduling today, and so these are some of the benefits that you can expect to see, and some of the process, to kind of give you an overview of the process of how you would get there. So I think with that, we're going to go to the question slide, and I will turn it back over to Alec to moderate that.
All right, Stacy, thank you, and thank you to Paul and Sarah as well. We are going to get into some questions while we have a little bit of time. If you have a question, just click on the Q&A icon on the bottom of your screen, type that question in, and click Submit. For most of you, the Q&A box should already be opened, unless you closed it earlier, but we're going to get into this. So we're going to start with one that I'm going to send to Sarah, and it comes from Thomas, and Thomas's question is, were any of the top trends more prevalent in a specific industry?
And that is a great question, and I wish that I could answer it. Unfortunately, the N that we had for the study was not large enough to cut by industry. So I can't conclusively say yay or nay to any specific trend being more prevalent. in other industries, although I agree with your assertion that they probably are, that you probably do see differences by industry, and I wish that I could answer that, but unfortunately not with the data set that I currently have.
All right, great. So we're going to wait for a couple minutes here, maybe 35, 40 seconds. We'll give it for a couple more questions to come in. That is actually all that we have in at the moment. But while we're waiting, I want to take this time to thank my colleagues here at Workforce and then Stacy over at WidgetBrain for coming together to work on this presentation. A lot of great information was shared. Remember that this is being recorded. You're going to receive a link to that recording about 24 hours after this webinar ends. Please keep your eyes open for that. And at this point, if you've been on here throughout the entire presentation, your HRCI and SHRM certification codes should be appearing in the certification box in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. Please take note of those now while we wait for some questions to come in. All right. It looks like that's going to be all the questions that we have come in today. So remember, please take this time to take note of your HRCI and SHRM codes up in the upper right-hand corner in that certification box. If you're not seeing that certification box, please click on the yellow certification icon on the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. Like I said, if you've been here throughout the entire presentation or at least 45 minutes, your code should be appearing for you now. Don't worry, though, they will be sent out to those that it applies in the follow-up email as well. So again, thank you to my colleagues here at Workforce.com and Stacy over at WidgetBrain for putting together today's presentation. And thanks to everybody for your attendance and participation in today's event. All right, so we will see you all back here for our next Workforce.com webinar, which is taking place Wednesday, March 25th at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific, titled The Rise of Voluntary Turnover in 2020 and What to Do About It. So thanks again, everybody, and have a great day.